everybody to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And we are so going to do it again tonight with one of our favorite guests. Before we get started, I want to invite you to our community, to our membership community here on YouTube. What is a membership community? A membership community is where you get exclusive access to videos that may not be aired to the regular YouTube station. There will be content created just for the membership community, and it's a little bit more intimate. Augie and I will be hosting live Q&As, live gatherings on Zoom that you can join us and just, hang out and talk to each other, talk about things, questions and answers. We may have questions for you. It's also a place where Augie and I are going to test pilot some topics that we've not been ready to share with the general population yet. So the link will be put in the chat by our amazing producer, Mac, and it's also on our YouTube page. So please join us. We're having our first get together Wednesday night at 7 p.m. It's only going to be about 30 minutes, but it's going to be action-packed and fun and, a big welcoming to all of our members so far. So please join us. And now, without taking up any more time, Augie, will you introduce our awesome guest?
Yes, I sure will. This is going to be fun. And actually, before I do that, also on the membership, I just sent you an email to all the members that have signed up so far. And go look in your email box and you'll find it. So you'll have the link and everything you need for tomorrow's meeting, because we're looking forward to see you there. And now we're going to visit with Brad Olsen, my favorite Norwegian. All right. And yeah, he actually don't really need a lot of introduction. I think just about everybody out there knows him, but just a few words for the three of you that don't. He's an explorer, a world traveler, is an author, written, gosh, I don't even know anymore. I think it's 10 or 11 books by now, isn't it?
10.
Yeah, 10. Okay, all right. And he's a researcher and a videographer. He's an event producer and a speaker on conferences all over the place. And he's a sought after guest on radio, TV, and documentaries. And well, I think that's probably pretty much all of the introduction that I'm going to do for Brad, because that's all that's necessary. Now, we're going to talk about the paranormal tonight, and I can think of nobody better than him to do that. And where does the paranormal in the past was almost known to be normal, and then it went away, and now it's starting to come back again, and we want to hear from Brad on this. So welcome to the show, Brad.
Hey,
welcome, Brad.
Thank you, guys. Hey, Nori. Hey, Augie, thanks for having me back on. Always love our conversations. And anything this wide open, this wide of a cast net, such as down the rabbit hole into the paranormal, you really kind of got to start at the beginning, right? You have to start with at least in the Western traditions, when humans first started to wake up to this whole idea of paranormal, beyond normal. Like you said, Augie, maybe at one time it was more normal than it was. Certainly in the time of the ancient Greeks, when everybody from commoners to kings made a pilgrimage to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi to hear the oracle speak in, usually it came out as gibberish, because she was sitting over a fissure where gases were coming out of the rock, and she was rather intoxicated. But there was a group of priests that would sit around and then interpret what she said into pithy rhymes. So everyone from Philip of Macedon to all their slaves, if they could get in, would go there, every commoner man. And the most famous is for Alexander the Great, who just before his campaign to fight his way through Persia and Egypt and all the way out to the Indus River on in Pakistan and India, all that way, his prophecy was my son, none shall resist thee. And it turned out to be absolutely true. So I've been very interested in these subjects since I was doing the Sacred Places series of books, where a lot of these really old locations, pre-Christian sites, had something to do with the paranormal. And this dates back all the way to the mystery schools of ancient Egypt, all the way up through Rome, and all the pagan traditions in Europe, so many of which we still pay homage to, such as Halloween is a purely pagan holiday that is celebrated up to this modern day. And so a lot of people don't realize they have a part of this paranormal or even pagan type celebrations in their lives unbeknown to them. So it's very important that people should understand what exactly this is all about.
Yeah, and that dates back 2,500 years or so, back to those days, or probably 27, maybe something like that. So it's been a while. And then I guess when the Catholic Church started, it kind of had to go underground because otherwise there'll be done unspeakable things to, I suppose.
Well, then there was, the whole crusades against the unbelievers, or even different sects of Christianity were highly persecuted. One time I did a press trip out to southern France and went to the Cathar region, and they were called the Albigensian Crusades against another sect of Christianity called the Cathars, and virtually wiped them out. So yeah, they were there. And the Cathars were like the mystical version of Christianity, and the Pope couldn't have that kind of competition where people were actually getting a spiritual experience to the core, where they knew it very familiar, like their own fingerprint. And that's why I think when the paranormal has been lost, but not really, it's still amongst us, and it just takes a different form and shape these days.
So I have to share this. It happened really organically. I have two women in my life that are Christian mystics, and one of them is much more involved with me than the other. And I was at her house, and she has this corner with all of her icons, right? All of her statues and icons up on a shelf. And she was doing her rituals to these icons. And I was observing her, and I thought, this is nothing different than witchcraft. It's not different. It's the same thing packaged by another name, you know?
That's right. Well, it's dabbling
Same
in the
thing.
occult, and sometimes you can open avenues you might not want to open. I mean, we all dabbled with the Ouija board, right? When we were in high school. And I think everybody I know has had some kind of weird experience with the Ouija board. And to me, it was, okay, I've seen enough. That's pretty darn
Right.
strange. I think I'm going to keep my distance.
Right. So we have to be mindful of what energies we're tapping into, right?
Exactly right.
And there's light and there's darkness. And I remember having a creepy experience that was very dark with the Ouija board. I was a little girl, but I knew to throw it away. I knew to get rid of it. So I learned really early about light and dark, and I probably would be a medium if I allowed it, because I had so much contact with spirit when I was a little girl. But I didn't want to, so I shut them off. And I said, if you need to talk through somebody, you can talk through my best friend. She's open to it. Um, but all of that is very real. So what was it like back in the beginning, back in the day before it became taboo? I mean, was everybody telepathic? Was everybody just, kind of floating on high energy and sharing premonitions? And I wonder what it was like.
I would say all those things you just described and a lot more.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know how in the Bible they describe demons down in hell, which is underground, which is a
Right.
fiery furnace, right? Where souls that were bad in life go down there and it's eternal damnation, it's fire and brimstone. And isn't it interesting now that we have started to speak about extraterrestrials and we know about underground bases? Doesn't it
Yes.
seem that the demons might be the Greys who live in these underground legacy bases like Dulce, New Mexico, and other
Wow.
places you can identify? And
Yeah.
isn't it interesting that Satan or the devil or Lucifer might just be a reptilian who has
Right.
fourth dimensional abilities that, when summoned, can show itself in various guises, sometimes often in a puff of smoke, such as, remember
Right.
in The Wizard of Oz when the wizard
Yeah.
came out, the puff of smoke? That is
Yes.
what I've come to see as a very common description of how these entities can be summoned and show up in different disguises. They don't only have to show up as a reptilian, but
Yeah.
notice how the goat or Baphomet often takes these animal human hybrid forms. So uh, even if you're an
Yeah.
atheist, just consider this scenario that
Yeah.
here's Nori, Augie, and I, and we get invited to go to some kind of ritual where there's promised to be an apparition. And we're kind of standing in the back and we're just sort of nudging each other. Oh, yeah, right. They're doing their chants and their incantations and they think something's going to happen here. But then something does happen here. And let's say this little guy pops out
Mm-hmm.
and can even speak in English, and the others who organize this are really into it and is following him, and yes, we'll do what you say, master, and this and that. And all of a sudden we're in the back and what did we just
Right.
see? Don't you think
Yeah.
you might walk out of that place perhaps with a different perspective?
Definitely.
Hmm.
Definitely. So,
And
so now I'm putting it together while you're speaking. All of the people who worship, air quotes, Satan, they are, yes, yes,
yeah,
look at
there
that.
you go.
They are harnessing their energy and allowing it to be used. And that's what the reptilians do to those of us who are unaware, those of us who are unwilling to give our energy to them, but they get it through fear, right? And insecurity and all of those other dense emotions. They try to. So this is the first time I put that together.
Hmm. Well,
So
Yeah,
what
and
humans
is
are
that?
we're a bit disadvantaged because we haven't been taught or trained or told any of this, or very, very little. You pretty much have to dabble into the occult to start to find these things out for yourself. And if you don't know what you're doing or where you're going, you can get in a lot of trouble. So
Exactly.
that's why having just this layman's discussion of the paranormal and the occult is actually very important for people to wrap their head around, because this is a very real phenomenon. Now,
It is.
when Bill Cooper came out in 1989, he went to the UFO Congress with a big stack of documents. I quote him very often in my Esoteric series of books. And he even said in the talk, you can find it on YouTube, a grainy old video. He said, I don't even know if I'm going to walk out of here alive. I'm just doing this data dump and giving this talk, and you guys make with it as you will. And I don't care if you even like me. You know, Bill Cooper was a big threat. But he
I
had a
remember that.
quote, which I often repeat. And because he came through naval intelligence and saw a massive craft come out of the ocean when he was on board a Navy vessel and had to go through the whole you didn't see what you saw, and if you ever talk about it, we're going to court martial you kind of thing. So he always carried this with him, that humanity had been withheld from this great secret of this extraterrestrial presence on Earth. And at that UFO Congress talk is one of his memorable lines, and this ties into the occult and the paranormal, because he said that as they were studying what they were learning from the ETs. It was then learned, and it is now understood, that these malevolent ETs have been manipulating humanity through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion for thousands of years. Now that we have the perspective of the malevolent ETs in the big picture here, you can kind of see how they did it, because they exist with abilities to phase in and out of our third dense reality here. They're fourth dimensional, so they can phase through walls. It was very hard to keep the very first gray aliens. They had to basically learn to keep them in Faraday cages. That's the only thing that wouldn't allow them to just walk through a wall. So, of course, the early engineers were just absolutely dumbfounded by this, how they were able to do that. But they're operating from a different level. And they've used that to manipulate humanity over these many millennia. And now, only now are we calling them out on it and starting to put all these dots together and see that they were largely the ones responsible for a lot of these rituals that took place over the decades and centuries and even millennia. These secret societies have been around for a long, long time, and they always seem to be very well empowered, both with access to the power structure of their nations, as well as the financial support to be able to rule. Now, isn't it interesting that a lot of the Europeans say that they have the divine right to rule? Oh, really? Who's divine? Yeah, right, by whom? And there's still some of these royal families out there, and we've heard they've done some dastardly deeds because they're the ones who are allied with these malevolent ETs all the while. And the church just saying, oh, it's demons, it's Satan, it's the bad side. But you know what? Even the Vatican got on board, and they too have gone to the dark side. And it's really obvious when you see the audience hall of the Vatican, which is just outside of St. Peter's Square. And it's a fairly modern building. And I've got a great image in here. I'm just trying to flip to it of what it looks like.
What book is that, Brad, that you're
illustrating? Esoteric. Okay, yeah, this is my latest one.
Yep.
Came out last year. And this is where I do my, the first two are great, and they're all standalone books. Modern Esoteric is basically starting at the beginning, all the traditions that we started talking about a little bit, the show. Yes. Future Esoteric gets into all the UFO ET related material, and then Beyond Esoteric takes us to this age. But then this book took me over 6 years to write. But here you go. Here's the audience hall in the Vatican. What does that look like?
Right?
A snake.
Yeah, exactly. Seriously. Like a snake. And look at the other couple pictures there. There is a head of a snake and how similar it looks on the outside. And then when he is sitting on the throne, it's like a demon right above him, although they say it's Jesus Christ. But what a representation coming out of the pits of hell. Yeah. So their symbols will be their downfall. And they have shown us in so many different ways what exactly they're up to and how they have interceded with this malevolent ET force over this period of time, basically since the advent of Western civilization, which in a roundabout way comes out of ancient Egypt. So you trace back your Western heritage to Egypt, which had all kinds of secret societies and mystery schools within it, the priesthood caste, and the living man who was a pharaoh was considered a living god. So there's your divine right to rule. And now there's talk that this pharaonic bloodline from ancient Egypt is alive and well today, and they happen to be the bankers in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. That's where the pharaohs ended up. And of course, Switzerland's always been neutral, always been this rich person's haven. Don't have to declare your wealth in Switzerland. You can have all that you need and want. But isn't it interesting that in ancient Egypt, you have the pharaoh who is a man, but a living god, worshiped that way by his people. Then when the Roman Empire took over the whole Mediterranean Sea basin and all of Western Europe, the Caesar was a living God and was worshiped therefore likewise. Now, what do you have? The Pope in Rome with his ear to God. And who are the guards of the Vatican? The Swiss guards. So there has been a Swiss Vatican City connection for thousands of years too. Well, since the advent of Christianity after the Council of Nicene and Constantine the Emperor made it the state religion. So for 1600 years, the eternal city is the nickname of Rome, has been the seat of Western civilization. And isn't it interesting that right there, slap dab in the middle, is a micronation with its own laws, its own police. Roman cops can't do anything in Vatican City. It's its own country. It has its own postage stamps, and it's guarded by the Swiss Guard. How convenient.
How convenient. So this book, I'm saying this book because I have my copy here, Beyond Esoteric. This book is so great because in order for me to get all of this information, I would have to buy a lot of occult books, probably including the ones written by Aleister Crowley, right? In order to get this information. So I don't have to do that. I'm holding the book up like you guys can see it. I don't have to do that because I have this book. This book is such a great resource. Yes. How can people get this book?
Well, at any bookstore. I have a great distributor out of Chicago where I grew up. Been working with them since the mid 1990s, called IPG. So they get it out to all independent bookstores. I'd always suggest go there first rather than that big online retailer named after a South American rainforest. They keep jacking the rules and percentages too. And just heard it today by someone who's doing some self-publishing through KDP, that they just jack the rates again. So, but if people want a signed copy, you can go to cccpublishing.com, and that comes out of my office, and happy to personalize and send a copy. And hey, they make great stocking stuffers, so I can even send it right to the person receiving it if you want to make it a Christmas present.
That's awesome. Here's an interesting segue and comment from the chat room. The Pope makes, Donna is saying this, the Pope makes it a point to join the other world leaders in Antarctica. There you go, Augie. What's going on there, Brad?
Well, Augie wanted to talk about Antarctica a little bit too. You want to segue?
There you go. Yeah, and you know, the Pope is just kind of like a shadow figure because he is part of the world cabal, and we know that. And they always have to tell us what they're doing before they do it. And one of the things that put take everything away from the Pope and leave him absolutely without any defense at all is that several years ago, when he was in Sao Paulo in South America, he did a speech in a cathedral down there in Latin. Nobody speaks Latin, so he spoke Latin, and everybody applauded because they thought it was so wonderful. In that speech, somewhere in that speech, it says, "We pray to our God, Lucifer." So there you go.
Called the revelation of the method, and it is actually an occult practice that they do have to telegraph what they're up to. And if we don't get it or we don't understand, then you're just an ignorant, stupid sheeple, and you'll never know, right? Yeah. So for those who are seeing what they're up to and they do it in the media all the time, it's there it is again. All right, more predictive programming, more occult symbols. You see it all the time. You can't unsee it once you start to see it.
So, Brad, is that hiding it in plain sight? I'm sorry, Augie.
Yes.
Is that what that is? Yeah.
Exactly what it is.
Yeah, you mentioned Antarctica and the Pope and Putin and several of the American high-profile politicians, and there were church leaders from Greece and a lot of different places. They all went to Antarctica at the same time.
Yeah.
What do you think happened there?
Yeah, just for your listeners to understand, I went down there 4 years ago, and that was a couple years after this 2016, 2017 period. Really interesting. Right around then was that huge election in America when everybody thought she'd win, but Trump won. And who's down there on election day? None other than Secretary of State John Kerry, who went down there as a climate champion to look into global warming, whatever the globalists told him to do. But he went off afield for several days and don't know where he went, but there are presumed 6 large globalist enclaves even under the ice. Now, people have to understand that Antarctica is the most sparsely populated continent. In the winter down there's only 1,000 people on the whole continent, and it's the 5th largest continent in the world. It's twice the size of Australia. And so the distances are very vast, and the possibility to hide out down there, even by some of these malevolent ET forces, is very high. And it's also the most geographically active continent, 91 known volcanoes. And some of those volcanoes create these geothermal vents, which heat up lakes that never freeze down there. And that's where the Nazis started their expedition and exploration. And nearby there is where their New Berlin compound is located, also called Base 211. And there are reports and a whole bunch of information. In fact, I'm going to do a conference talk in 2025 called Birds Antarctica, and it'll mostly center around the Battle of High Jump and the New Berlin base and what the Nazis were finding down there. And it turns out one of these big ships, and there's supposed to be 3 that our intelligence agencies have known about, so big they're miles across, motherships that were known to be poking out of the ice during the summer months. And they nicknamed them the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. And I think I can positively ID the location of one of those, which happens to be in the New Schwabenland claim of Nazi Germany. And in 2013, they were doing excavations on it. And you can see it quite clearly on Google Earth. It's one of those few instances where they haven't scrubbed the internet of it. And I kind of wonder why. Maybe because it's obscure enough that it's just some giant looking machine, but the ceilings were very, very high. In fact, I love it when data points collect around this, because the Farsight Institute with Courtney Brown and the remote viewers there, they used it as a target, and they went inside and said it's massive, and it was built for giants. And that's the other thing about Antarctica, is that some of these under ice chambers are stasis chambers. There's even what's known as the arcs, which are even active motherships that can also take refuge down there and not be seen by any humans of the earth. So Antarctica is full of secrets. And then, as you said, Augie, all these elite were going down there in 2016, 2017 timeframe. And from the Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, to go down there to bless a chapel, which is about as big as your walk-in closet. Oh, really? An old man's going to go and risk his life. I mean, it's tough passage. I think I've been on your show and I've told you about my journey in a sailboat, and I was puking my guts out for 3 days. Lost about 25 pounds on that trip. It is not easy going down there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
God. I think, though, that what they see coming out of the ice in Antarctica has some similarity to some of it that is coming out from underneath the ice in Greenland. There are some people from Denmark, of course, they supposedly own Greenland. They are going up there and start digging into the side of the ice, and they find buildings and they find stuff up there too that has been absolutely covered up until now. And I see 2 pictures of a building that came out from underneath the ice. And that's something that one of the researchers from Denmark had published before they probably caught him at it. Because, you're not supposed to have building, millions of years ago when they covered it up in ice. But in Antarctica, the Nazi Germans, they went down there, started going down there and researched the continent in 1939, according to German documents. And Admiral
38, actually.
Dönitz, yeah, and they found the huge cavern, and they start building their society in there. And now there's what it looks like more than one cavern for them. So, and they're still there.
Oh yeah, they're still there. Why would they leave? Right?
Yeah.
Although they might be getting forced out now. And this is what I was saying in our pre-interview chat, that earlier this year, there was a huge amount of German-speaking, mostly men, who were in a hurry to get out of there as quick as they could. And they had to go through McMurdo Base. And so there was this big influx of German-speaking people earlier this year. But if we look at Antarctica without the ice, I have this map in Beyond Esoteric, you can see it's really two continents. There's the Western Antarctica, very rocky part, and then this main part is Eastern Antarctica, which is an ancient continental landform that broke off from Pangaea, Gondwana land, many, many millions of years ago. It's dated at 3 billion years old. It's one of the original plates on this planet that is broke off. And so then you put 2 miles of ice on top of it and with heating from the geothermal vents to keep it going, it might even be t-shirt weather down there. Another thing a lot of people don't know about Antarctica is it holds one of the top 10 largest freshwater lakes in the world, called Lake Vostok. And they find the Russians have a base on top of there, 2.2 miles above on the polar plateau. And they finally drilled down there a couple of years ago and took a sample and got some bacteria off of, they think, a fish that has as yet been discovered. And then there's other stories that I can't verify, but there's some animals that live in that lake that could actually confront a human and do damage. And apparently the Russians in a secret mission went down there and were confronted with some kind of squid-like animal that can live in this. If you think about it, the Lake Vostok is probably geothermally heated, so it never freezes. And that there's this dome of ice that just covers it. So it's quite fascinating when you think about all the possibilities of what might be down there, and then how much we know about it. And it's slowly starting to trickle in. Trying to flip to a page here where I have a map that the Nazi Germans made of their claim called New Schwabenland. And on it are the Schumacher Ponds, where the first expedition landed a plane. And it was a seaplane piloted by a German pilot named Schumacher. He stayed behind and he did tests of the ice and found that that they were warmer as you went deeper into the lake. Usually it's the other way around. There's a thermocline. It gets colder at a lake when you go down. So suggesting to him that these were lakes that stayed unfrozen year round. And indeed, that is where they put their stake down and claim. Now, I've come into some information recently, Augie, you'll find this interesting, that the Draco reptilians, who they were allied with, not only may have been the ships that came up out of the water to confront Admiral Byrd in the Battle of High Jump, could have been very well reptilian ships because you couldn't get near shooting them down or anything, but that they had given the New Berlin base as one of their older bases to the Germans, saying, here you go, just go ahead and lay a claim. Now, here's that map of New Schwabenland that was actually drafted by Germans. And then the Bell, and then, all kinds of stuff. And that might be another one of the craft of the ice. So it's a land full of mystery. And the fact that the Nazis, who were so advanced with their technology, the wonder weapons, that all the allies were worried they're going to get nuked, or direct energy laser weapons, which was introduced in the Battle of High Jump, and they sliced one of the ships in half. They could have totally taken out the entire fleet, but they just wanted to have a show of force to say, hey, don't mess with us. but they did come back about a decade later in 1950s, and that was the nuclear test called Project Argus, which is still to this day a classified program. And that's what they're saying. We're going to blow up the upper atmosphere, alternative one, and let all the pollution go out of the planet. I mean, it's such a cockamamie idea, but I cover that in alternative 1, 2, 3 chapter here about all the stuff that they were trying to do there. But I think that was really in retaliation for the Battle of High Jump. And if I were ever to go back to Antarctica, I would go with some Geiger counters, and where do I want to go is to this area near the Schumacher Ponds and do some investigation and see if indeed there is any kind of radiation. Because if there is, then it would show that that they nuked base 211, and that's where it ended. But they didn't really like it down there, and it's so difficult for normal people to live down there. It is very confining, and it's dark for 4 months a year. But when I was in South America, I was poring over all these maps and coming across giant land holdings in Chile and Argentina, which are essentially micronations. And so I think a lot of the German engineers with their families, and thousands of Ukrainian women at the end of World War II went missing. And they took them to be companions for the German scientists who got out of there en masse, but they never really liked Antarctica. So by the time of Argus, when they nuked New Schwabenland, most of them had already gone to some of these micronations in South America and elsewhere.
Yeah, we know that the ice in Antarctica is very old, because Antarctica is one of the driest places on Earth. It hardly ever snows down there, but you still have over 2 miles of ice.
Yeah.
So that tells you it's got to be millions of years old.
I'll tell you a little anecdote about the ice. When it's really, really old, it turns blue. It's beautiful. It's blue ice. Especially that comes out of the polar plateau, and usually the glaciers, which are calving down there and kicking off really old ice, you can see it. And we took our dinghy up to it and chipped off some ice to put in our cocktails, because when we were at the very first base we went to is Arktowski, run by the Poles, and I was on a Polish vessel, 11 Poles and 3 Americans, and we got invited to go to Arktowski. And the first night there, after we all had showers from throwing up on the boat, it felt so good to be on terra firma and have a warm meal and get to know these people. And they broke out the guitars and started playing music. And then they said, well, would you guys like to have a drink? And I think we had our own bottles too, and asked if that's okay if we share. And they broke out the blue ice and put it in our drinks. And then when they poured the alcohol and the mixer in there, it started popping like popcorn. I've never seen anything like it. It's pop, 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 pop. And then you drink a cocktail and put some more blue ice in there and it pops again. So that was a cool phenomenon.
Wow. Will you just briefly talk about the Battle of High Jump for those who are unfamiliar?
Absolutely. Well, it took place right off ashore of New Schwabenland. There's that Nazi map again. And it had happened on the second day of Allied bombing. So this was in December 1946. They get down there, and it's this giant squadron. It's not just US, but a lot of the Allied nations that had just concluded World War II. This is a year and a half after VE Day, Victory in Europe. War is supposed to be over, yet the Pentagon is sending down this huge fleet of ships with military men on a military expedition. It had nothing to do with science, which was the cover story. So they go down there, and there are submarines, there's battleships, and all kind of amphibious vehicles that they needed to do a landing with very highly trained men on board. And so the Battle of High Jump started on day 2. The first day they knew where the base was, and they had been surveying up and down the coast for the first month. And then they finally came in and did like a little pitter patter dropping of bombs on some outbuildings, but it's mainly an underground base there. They're coming back the next day with much bigger bombs, and those planes just went blip off the screen, and those pilots and crew, not one of them ever heard from again. It's one of the great mysteries of what happened on that day, because also on that day, only an hour or two later, up out of the water come these dish-shaped craft that have some kind of very high technology that they can come from underwater and then hover with a kind of force field around them, so that whatever guns were firing on them, they didn't take a single loss. But then they had this show of force by slicing one of the boats in half with what we would understand today as a direct energy weapon developed by Tesla pre-World War II, called the death ray. So they had this technology back then too. But as I said, it's now thought that perhaps some of these craft could have been reptilian craft, and the Germans just after 46 would have still been in the mode of assembling these craft or backward engineering this technology. It could have been the Nazi Germany's, because then only a couple years later was the famous flyover of DC. And this was in 1952, in the waning years of Truman's administration. And Truman was forced to sign a treaty with them before Eisenhower was sworn in as president. He inherited this. And how do I know this? I'm working with Laura Eisenhower, the great granddaughter, and publishing her next book, in which she gives information through her family and through her connections in this political royalty, political family, that indeed the Germans won World War II. And do you realize the Third Reich never surrendered? They just became the Fourth Reich, and they took their show elsewhere, including off planet. And if history were to truly be told correctly, they beat America to the moon by decades. They were probably the first humans in this modern age to stand on the moon in the late 1930s or perhaps 40s. But we got all their scientists, or at least some of them, who came over here in Project Paperclip, including Herman Oberth, who famously said, "We got help from above," and Werner von Braun, who started NASA. And I met Joseph Farrell and read his books. Great researcher on post-war Germany and the Fourth Reich. And in his book, he gave many examples of, because many of them were high ranking and then they infiltrated into government or corporations, that they were passing attaché bags, that they had diplomatic immunity. So including Werner von Braun went down to Antarctica and South America on numerous occasions and was able to carry a briefcase that would not be searched. So they were even, our paperclip Nazis were still loyal. And you better believe Hitler survived the war, because he did. And when I was in a place called La Falda, I did a tour of the Eden Hotel, a very wealthy German family who had personal ties with Adolf Hitler, and took the tour. And this is in the History Channel 3-season show called Hunting Hitler. And they interviewed this chambermaid who lives in La Falda. And I asked my tour guide at the end, "Do you really think Hitler survived?" He goes, "Oh, I know they did. There's a woman right here in town that does interviews who was a teenage chambermaid in the Eden Hotel, and she spoke of Hitler and Eva Braun and even their dog, the German Shepherd dog Blondie. They all came over. He faked his death. They had a doppelganger, several doppelgangers of Hitler, and they split at the end of World War II in the Fuhrer convoy. And this was another battle that nobody knows about, but it is in Joseph Farrell's books, and also a great book called The Black Sun, where the final battle of World War II was a rout in favor of the Germans and their U-boats. They just blasted their way through the North Atlantic, went all the way down, and then Hitler and their convoy were met off the shore in Argentina, and then had numerous houses, mansions all over the place in all these German enclaves, including near San Carlos de Bariloche. I've been to Germany many times, and when I went to Bariloche, I like, crap, I'm in Bavaria right now. It felt exactly like you're in an Alps city. And of course, Hitler loved his eagle's nest down in Berchtesgaden, which I've been to. And while all his buildings have been taken out, they still have a museum to the Third Reich in World War II and some of the bunkers underneath the eagle's nest there at Berchtesgaden. So then when they did this treaty, this is how it's all coming together for me, how I'm starting to understand this untold history in relation to the Fourth Reich in the Americas. And I get into it in a whole chapter in Future Esoteric about our about the paperclip Nazis that came here, but also in the Americas, so also in South America. And then our CIA started working for them. They went rogue, and they now support the globalists. Who are the globalists? And yes, they have connections to the occult, mostly German speaking, mostly German Swiss, like Klaus Schwab. I mean, this is who they are. They're still alive. They still have this ideology. And then we hear about in Ukraine, they even wear badges with the black sun emblem on it. I mean, it's just so obvious if you know what you're looking for and you recognize the symbols, that they just went underground and became an intelligence force. They left the fighting forces of continental Europe to the American bases all around the continent and the Russians. And then they just fanned the flames of discontent and basically created the Cold War. Look, America and Russia were very close allies in World War II in defeating them. And then all of a sudden, we're the worst enemies, right? Well, that's because we were being provoked, because their top spy named Reinhard Gehlen came over here and helped start up the CIA and much of the spy agencies, because his job was to spy on the Russians in the Soviet Union during World War II. So, I mean, this goes really deep, you guys, and it ties into a lot of what is going on in this country, and this fascism, this neo-fascism, as I describe in Beyond Esoteric, that has infested this great country of ours, and how we've gotten to the point of where we are now because they were so good at assimilating in and assuming power positions. And this is the mess we find ourselves in today.
Yeah, and I know the Americans did things totally different than the Russians did. We kept all the German scientists after they came here. We picked their brains, and we knew much of what they knew. There are some things they wouldn't even tell us. But the Russians, they had them for several years over there. They picked their brains too. And after they had no use for them, they repatriated the German scientists back to Germany. But we kept them. And they are embedded in every branch of government, and they are running a lot of the things here. Still.
Yeah, they are. Still, they never went away. Exactly. And they injected their fascist ideology into our country, and they knew how to break it down through educational system and influence government and blackmail the honeypots. I mean, all the dirty tricks to take over a society, a civilization. This is the problem we find ourselves in. We're still battling them today, and this is the ultimate showdown. Now that they have allied with these malevolent ETs, gave them a big upper hand. But it's also my understanding in the study of exopolitics that they are being rooted out by the friendlies, by the good benevolent ETs, realizing that we are so disadvantaged that without a little help with these extraterrestrials that have infestated this planet, that we were no match. it would be, we would be like the movie Avatar, that we would be this corporation, a fascist planet that was just going out and exploiting any other planet, because that's who the Draco Reptilian are. They are an exploiting race. That's all they do. They're like locusts in the universe, and just find a weak planet that they can take over or manipulate with smaller numbers through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion. Any way they can do it, they'll do it, because that's how they stay in power. And it's my understanding there are some that are actually good that do want to ascend to the 5D, but because they're more of a hive mind ET race, they've just decided they don't want to do it. That they want to just keep on doing what they do, because once, as a people, as a species, once you go to 5D and above, these are dimensional realities where you have to embrace the higher emotions of life. And how can you be a locust species across the universe and embrace the emotion love? So by and large, the reptilians, they just made that decision that they want to be the bad guys, and they don't care.
Yeah, the Nazi, they just after the war in Germany, they just left to different places. In fact, if you go into the Nuremberg papers, which I read much of a long time ago, we found out in the Nuremberg papers, the unwanted German soldiers that they didn't think could be repatriated were allowed to go somewhere and live. Guess where that is? Right now, where they're having a war in Eastern Europe. That's the country where they were allowed to live. And there were thousands of them that were moved there. And then they came to the United States and started taking over South America. They had political connections. They knew how to manipulate society.
So well.
Yeah.
And
Wow,
how to influence those with the levers of power to their advantage. I mean, there are many agendas that are taking place here on Earth right now. The human agenda, if there is one, if we feel collective enough to call it that, is much different than some of the ET races that have been here or are watching us. And many are just watching in amazement at this human show unravel, because for the very first time in history, we're not going to be manipulated on a mass level or killed off. Wholesale killing always gets rid of your detractors, right? And horrifically, that'll keep people from speaking up, won't it? Just go back to tilling your field. So never before have we had this conversation over a mainstream media type channel of our own where we can have this conversation. It's only in our lifetimes has this been possible. And now, because it is the great battle for planet Earth, the great awakening versus the great reset of this Davos crew who want to depopulate and work in this anti-human, malevolent ET neo-fascist state, that we're up against the battle of planet Earth right now. These silent weapons and quiet wars are taking place all around us right now. And most people are completely oblivious to anything happening.
Yeah, that document, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, that's been around since, I think, back in the 70s. When I read it, they explain exactly what they're doing.
Sure. Yeah, good one to read, guys. If you can find it out there, be familiar with it. And they've had these kind of weapons for a long time too. These sonic weapons, the voice to skull technology, where they can put thoughts and voices in your head like a schizophrenia. So I'm not even ruling out that they're not going to do Project Bluebeam, the fake holographic alien invasion, and then they hit us all with the voice to skull technology, and we're hearing all these voices. It's that insidious. It's that down the line it's gone, where the final showdown is now coming, and it's we're walking the razor's edge here, which way humanity is going to go. And of course, we're all pulling for the great awakening, and that's what this is all about. And it's very encouraging that we can even have this conversation, because in times of old, our voices would be squelched. And that, to me,
Yeah.
that shows that there is white hat resistance out there, and that there are some things to be encouraged by, that we might be winning this silent war with quiet weapons.
Boy, it's interesting.
Amazing. So interesting. I can't believe we only have 4 minutes left. This hour flew by.
Well, you know, you're having a good time when
Right?
Yeah, we're having a good time.
It's always that way when you come on, Brad. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
happy to be here.
Tell us
Are
again
we-
where they can get a hold of your books, and talk a little bit about the books.
Sure. cccpublishing.com, one word. Order one of my books. I also publish other authors, but my books, I can sign them for people, but all of them make great Christmas presents. If you want to know more about me and the other projects that I work on, bradolson.com, including a link to all the upcoming conferences that I'll be speaking at, starting in February, and as well as spring equinox near you, Augie, in Sedona. I'll be at the big Sedona event over the spring equinox, and would love to see you guys out there if you can make it. And then a couple in Mount Shasta, and a couple more around the country. I'm already booking all the way into October. I've got about a dozen conferences coming up for 2023. So I see the future is very bright. It's an amazing time to be alive. For all the people that are just feeling the weight of all the pressure in the world, just, you're going to want to stick around and watch this show. It's amazing. And just to have your conscious mental focus on the good outcome of the Great Awakening is all you need to do. That's the only skin in the game you need to have, is just your positive thought patterns that this is going to be a good outcome, and we're going to free the human race for the first time in history. That's what the prison planet in the subtitle of my book is all about. It's not that this is not a beautiful planet. It is so worth saving and preserving. It's the prison planet of the constructs of the mind that have been imposed upon the human race over these many hundreds and thousands of years, that we're finally having the opportunity to break free from. So you're going to want to watch this show. It's the greatest show in the universe right now. And there are a lot of the benevolents that are watching how this is going to come out. So, good time to be alive. And that's why I'm offering these books to help as a guidepost for people to understand this momentous period in history.
Yeah.
So helpful.
And that's up to us to educate ourselves. And like you said, it's in the mind. So we create our existence in our mind first, and then we live it. So chances are some of us need to change their mind. There's a lot of negative information out there that is accepted as truth. And once you put your one toe outside of the box, the whole foot's going to get drawn out there, and you're going to come out and you're going to find some of that truth. And it's up to us to look for it. So we're doing that.
Yes, we are. Broadcast to broadcast, book to book, having conversations with our friends and family. And I'm going to make this prediction now that 2023 is going to blow people's minds. It's when it all starts coming out. All these things that we've been called all kinds of names and conspiracy theorist claims. Yeah. It's I'm not one to say I told you so, but it's basically going to vindicate so many people in this field that have been screaming from the mountaintops. Better be ready, people, because this is it. And we're gonna find it's gonna be pretty dark at times too, what has happened to the human race. But preview, getting ready for it, help people out when they start to see it, which is probably right after the holidays, is my prediction. It's gonna right out of the gate in January. It's gonna be mind-blowing.
There's a development coming up, and that is that there's going to be a day when some of the people that unfriended you on Facebook, they're going to come back and say, yeah, I know there was something to what you were talking about.
That's funny. That's true. Augie, do you want to ask your final And same
Oh,
question.
oh yes, yes. This is my favorite question. Unless I forget, I always love to ask this one, and that is, if you could talk to the whole world, Brad, and the world was listening, what would you tell them?
What I just said is be cognizant of the coming changes and put your consciousness in the love vibration as best you can. It's very, very important. And this is part of the human ascension period right now, too, that we as the human race may be in the opportunity to ascend very, very quickly into the fifth dimensional realm, this
Yeah.
realm of love and gratitude and higher emotional state. But it's a rocky road, and we're all challenged in so many different ways, not to feed the lion, so to speak, or feed the wolf in the old Native American example. Is you have the choice. You can feed the wolf with hatred and anger and fear, or you can feed the higher side and try to have a higher emotional state as we come into all this. And that's where we need people to be. And that's how we win, with that critical mass of enough people on board, where it's just all this stuff just falls to the wayside and you're not even really concerned about it. But the new earth is upon us, and you're going to want to watch this show, how it plays out. This is what we've all, I believe, been incarnated for, and accepted this mission wholeheartedly, put our hand up and say, all right, I'll do it. I mean, 100 million or so empathic star seeds coming to Earth. What, to be enslaved by this neo-fascist world order? No, thank you. That's not going to happen. That's not what we're here for. We're here for the ascension moment, and we're on the brink of seeing that happening. And so to be
Yes.
alive in a human body right now is just such a gift. And really, all this stuff's make believe, by the way, that they've festooned upon us with money and all the other stupid stuff that we feel like we have to care about. And I think that's all going to change very, very quickly here.
I think so too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everybody in the chat room or watching the replay. Thanks, Augie. Thanks, Mac. We'll see everybody next week.
We
Much
will
love,
see you
everybody. Bye-bye.
Live long and
Have a
prosper.
good night.